Welcome back, my family, to Story Vault. Tonight, I'm sharing 10 true, disturbing stories from the Appalachian wilderness. These are accounts of people who wandered too deep into the mountains and found things no one was ever meant to see. Each story is a chilling reminder that some places should remain untouched. So hit that like and subscribe button, share with friends, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. I never thought I'd step foot in my grandparents' old house again. It had been sitting abandoned for almost 10 years, perched crookedly on the edge of a quiet stretch of road in deep Appalachia. The paint was long gone, eaten away by rain and sun, and the porch sagged as if the whole thing was just waiting to collapse. Still, when the lawyer told me it was mine to deal with after they passed, I figured I'd spend a few days there cleaning out what I could before deciding whether to sell or just let it rot into the hillside. I drove up that gravel drive late in the afternoon, the air thick with cicadas, my pickup rattling over potholes. I cut the engine and just sat there for a minute staring at the place. Every memory I had of it came flooding back. Grandma cooking biscuits in the kitchen, Granddad sitting in his rocker with a pipe, the faint smell of cedar and tobacco. But now it looked hollow. Windows like dead eyes, boards warped and blackened. I pushed the front door open. It groaned, dust spilling down from the frame. Inside, it was cooler, damp even, like the house had been sweating for years. Sheets covered the furniture, heavy with grime. The air smelled like mildew and something faintly metallic. I lit a lantern I'd brought with me since the power was long shut off, then dropped my bag by the sofa. I was staying 2 nights, maybe 3 tops. Or at least, that was the plan. That night, I unrolled a sleeping bag in what used to be the living room. The lantern flickered weakly against the peeling wallpaper. I tried to read a bit from a paperback I'd brought, but every creak of the house kept tugging my attention away. The place was alive in its own way, wood popping, wind pushing through cracks. I told myself that was all it was. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. A faint scraping, metal on wood, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was outside, maybe a branch dragging along the siding. But as I sat there listening, my skin prickling, I realized it was beneath me. It was coming from under the floorboards. The sound moved back and forth under the living room, a steady scrape, like something dragging nails along the underside of the planks. My breath hitched in my throat, and I grabbed the lantern. The light pushed the shadows back a little, but not enough. I sat up, frozen, staring at the boards under my feet. After what felt like forever, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Eventually, I laid back down, though it was hours before I slept again. I should have left the next morning. Every instinct told me to, but stubbornness got the better of me. I told myself it was just animals under the house, maybe raccoons or stray dogs. I spent the day cleaning out some cupboards, bagging up old clothes that smelled like dust and mothballs. That night, though, the sounds came back. I was drifting in and out of sleep when I heard it again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Only this time, it wasn't moving aimlessly. It was coming closer. I sat up, heart thudding, and listened. The scraping rose up beneath the kitchen floor now, sharper, heavier, like claws dragging across wood. Then, something new, a voice. At first, it was too muffled to make out. A low murmur, broken syllables. I leaned forward, straining my ears, and I swear I heard it whisper, "Let me out." The words slid through the boards in a breathless rasp. My chest locked up. I grabbed my lantern and walked toward the kitchen, each step shaky. The closer I got, the clearer the whisper became, though it was warped, like it wasn't a voice meant for speaking. "Open, let me out." That's when I heard it, the hatch. There was a square hatch in the kitchen floor, a door to the crawlspace. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. Now, as I stood in the doorway with my lantern trembling in my hand, I watched the latch jiggle. Slowly, it began to lift. The hatch creaked open just an inch. Then a hand emerged. It was pale, dirt-caked, the skin stretched tight over bone. Long fingers clawed at the wood as if trying to pull the rest of the body up. I dropped the lantern and it rolled across the floor, throwing shadows everywhere. The hatch groaned wider. That arm, long, impossibly long, kept reaching. I bolted. I didn't stop to grab my bag or lock the door. I just tore out the front door and into the night, my boots pounding the earth. The trees swallowed me fast, the lantern's light fading behind me. My breath came ragged, loud in the stillness. Then, I heard it again. Footsteps. They weren't mine. They were heavier, uneven, just a few paces behind me. I pushed harder, weaving through the dark forest, branches clawing at my arms. Every time I thought I was putting distance between me and it, the steps followed, steady and relentless. Somewhere deep in those woods, I tripped and went sprawling into the dirt. My knee screamed, but I scrambled back up, pressing myself against the base of a tree. My ears strained against the silence. And then, I heard breathing. It was close, wet, rattling, like lungs clogged with soil. I clamped a hand over my mouth, shaking. The breathing passed just yards away, circling. At one point, I swore I saw something pale moving between the trees, but I couldn't make myself look too long. I stayed pressed against that tree until the black sky gave way to gray dawn. Only then did I stagger back toward the road, limping the whole way. The house stood silent when I came back into view. The hatch was shut, the kitchen dark. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But the dirt on my clothes, the scratches on my arms, the throbbing pain in my knee, those were real enough. I didn't go back inside. I climbed straight into my truck, turned the key, and didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I never returned to that house. It's still there, as far as I know, sagging deeper into the earth. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear that voice, muffled, rasping, just beneath the floorboards. Let me out. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories, but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. My name's Daniel, and I grew up in a small Appalachian town where the woods stretched on forever and every hollow had a story whispered about it. My cousin Mason and I used to think those stories were just meant to scare kids away from dangerous places, nothing more. But looking back now, I wish I had listened. There's one place I'll never forget, Fox Hollow. Folks around town said you shouldn't go there after dark, and some even said you shouldn't go there at all. The warnings were clear enough, but Mason had always been the reckless one. And when he dared me to camp there with him, I didn't back down. We were both in our early 20s, restless and bored. Mason was loud, stubborn, and always chasing a thrill. I was quieter, more careful, but he knew how to push me into things. We set out one afternoon with our packs, a tent, and enough food to last 2 nights. The trail leading in was overgrown, barely touched, with roots curling across the dirt like veins. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. About 2 miles in, we came across a sign nailed to a tree. It was weathered, half the letters fading, but you could still read the words, "N.O. Return Trail." Mason laughed, said it was probably some hunter's idea of a joke. I laughed too, though something in my gut twisted. We kept walking. As the sun dipped low, the hollow opened up into a gully with steep ridges on either side. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a tree stump, pale against the dusk. But then it moved. It was tall, taller than any man, with limbs that seemed too long, dragging slightly as it moved. Its skin was bone white, stretched thin, and its jaw, hung low and split down the middle like it had been cracked open. It turned its head toward me, and though I couldn't see eyes, I felt its gaze. "Dan, what's wrong?" Mason asked, his voice casual. I blinked, and the thing was gone, melted into the shadows of the gully. My mouth went dry. "Nothing," I muttered. I didn't want him to think I was losing it, but the image stayed burned in my mind. We set up camp near a cluster of oaks. Mason built a small fire while I tried to shake off the unease crawling over me. The woods seemed too still, like every cricket and owl had gone silent. That night, as we lay in the tent, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of that pale figure in the gully. Every snap of a twig outside made me flinch. Around midnight, Mason stirred. "You hear that?" he whispered. I held my breath. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Then I heard it too, faint footsteps circling the tent. I reached for the flashlight, but Mason stopped me. "Don't," he hissed. We lay there, rigid, listening. The footsteps faded, and eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke, Mason was gone. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The tent flap was open, his sleeping bag empty. I stumbled out into the cold morning air, calling his name. The woods swallowed my voice. "Mason!" No answer. Panic set in fast. I tore through the trees, scanning the underbrush, shouting until my throat went raw. Then, from deep in the woods, I heard something that froze me in place. It was my mother's voice. "Daniel." She was calling softly, just like she used to when I was a boy playing outside too long. My skin went cold. She had no reason to be here, no way to be here. The voice came again, lilting, sweet, familiar. "Daniel, come this way." I stumbled backward, my chest tightening. "No," I whispered. The voice repeated my name, but it was wrong now, drawn out, echoing, like it was struggling to shape the word. And then I saw them. Pale shapes moving between the trees, long-limbed and eyeless. They circled slowly, their jaws split wide as they opened their mouths. The air filled with voices, my mother's, Mason's, even my father's who'd been dead for years. All of them calling to me, overlapping, pulling at the most vulnerable parts of me. "Dan, help me." Mason's voice croaked, close enough to make me spin around. But there was no one there, only one of those things, its face tilting toward me like it was listening to my heartbeat. I stumbled backward until my foot caught a root and I hit the ground hard. My flashlight rolled away, and in the dim morning light, I saw them closing in. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets on strings. Every time their mouths opened, another loved one's voice came out, begging me, tricking me, luring me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Branches tore my arms, the woods echoing with a chorus of voices. Mason shouting for help, my mother calling me home, my father whispering my name. I didn't dare look back. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally broke through the tree-line, the old trail stretched before me, faint but real. I followed it blindly, lungs burning, legs screaming, until I stumbled onto the gravel road where we'd left Mason's truck. The truck was empty. I waited there for hours, hoping Mason would come out of the woods. But he never did. When the sun began to sink again, I couldn't force myself to go back in. I drove away, tears blurring the road, my cousin's pack still in the back seat. No one believed me when I told them what happened. They searched, of course, but they never found Mason. The official word was that he got lost, maybe fell, maybe a bear got him. But I know the truth. Those things in Fox Hollow, whatever they are, they're still there, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I hear Mason's voice calling from the dark. "Dan, come this way." My name is Adam. I'm 30, quiet by nature, and I fix appliances for a living. I'm not brave. I'm not outdoorsy beyond a few weekend hikes, and I don't go looking for trouble. After my uncle's funeral, though, the house felt tight as a jar with the lid screwed on too hard. He was the one who taught me to set a hook and follow a trail without getting lost. When the condolences were done and the food went cold, I put a sleeping bag in my truck and drove to Jasper Bend because that was our place. I told myself I'd just walk until the noise in my head faded. Jasper Bend sits where the river turns in on itself and teases the shore, flattening into a long gravel bar before swinging back toward the trees. There's a rutted pull-off where the old logging road ends. I got there in late afternoon with the sky the color of old pewter and the wind dragging its fingers through the sycamores. I cut the engine and just listened to nothing for a minute. Grief is strange. It doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it feels like the world is wrapped in thick cloth and all the edges are dull. I strapped on my pack and started down the path, the river murmuring somewhere to my right. Leaves stuck to my boots from a shower earlier in the day. The trail slipped between beech trunks and faded blazes. A crow followed me for a while, shifting from branch to branch like it didn't trust me to go alone. I tried to think about football, about work orders, anything but the polished words from the service and the way my aunt stared at the empty chair in her living room. About half a mile in, the woods opened into a flat shelf cut into the slope. I would have walked past it if a rectangle of stone hadn't caught my eye. It was an old foundation, ankle-high walls of fieldstone forming a room with no house, a box set neatly into the ground. In the middle of it, the floor dipped into a square pit the size of a grave. Out of that dark square grew a sapling, straight and stubborn, no thicker than my wrist, its leaves shining like green coins in the flat light. The image hit me hard, a young tree clawing up through something dead. I climbed down carefully, testing the stones with my weight. At the edge of the pit, I crouched and looked in. The bottom was damp and stained, a shallow basin of clay with a scatter of broken glass. The sapling thrust from the center as if it had been planted there on purpose. I brushed dirt from a bottleneck, old, thick glass with bubbles in it, the kind you only find when a place's story has already been told. Whoever lived here had left long ago. The air smelled cold, like water under a rock. "All right," I said to nobody, hearing my voice go small. "I see you." I wasn't sure who that was meant for, my uncle, the empty foundation, or the tree refusing to give up space. I set my palm against the sapling's skin for a second, as if checking a child's forehead for a fever, then stood and climbed out. The shadows were getting long. The river's hush grew louder with each step until I broke out into the open at the bend. The gravel bar was pale and wide. I pitched my small tent just above the waterline where the stones gave way to sand. I liked that it was simple out there. Your tasks showed themselves in order. Tent, water, food, fire. I gathered a fistful of driftwood and some fallen limbs, enough for a small blaze if the wood would catch, then walked to the edge and knelt to fill my bottle. Minnows flicked near my hands like bits of polished metal. The current nudged pebbles and set them clicking in place. Dusk came with a faint pink seam along the horizon, then the seam bled out. I coaxed the fire into a modest glow and warmed a can of soup. It tasted like the campouts from when I was 10, tinny, scalding, perfect. I thought about my uncle's whistle, the way he could make a tune carry without being shrill. He'd used to whistle old songs while we cleaned fish or played cards, something steady that made the moment feel tied down. Maybe that's why I started to whistle, just to feel like he was there. I picked a tune without thinking and let it go quiet when I realized how far sound travels in a place with no other voices. A few minutes later, I heard whistling answer me from the tree line. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. It wasn't a full melody at first, just two notes, low and close together, like someone testing a mouth they'd never used. Then the two notes stretched into the same shape I'd made, the same small climb and drop, the same quick catch of breath between phrases. It was my tune try on a new set of lungs. "Hello," I called. "Didn't mean to bother you." The trees offered back river and dark. No footfalls, no break of brush. I stood up, my knees popping loud in the quiet, and walked a few steps toward the edge of the gravel. I didn't see anyone. The whistling didn't come again. The fire snapped and threw a twist of sparks that looked like a swarm of tiny, confused insects. I wanted to tell myself it was a bird. Some can mimic. That's a fact. But no bird I knew waited, listened, and then tried out the exact rise and fall of a tune like a careful student. I banked the fire low and slid into the tent. The nylon smelled faintly of last summer and sun. I stretched out on my pad and tried to read by headlamp, but the words pressed together. I turned out the light and lay there with the night pressing back. The river made its slow shush like a hand smoothing a sheet. I tracked my breathing. Somewhere out there a barred owl asked its old question. I must have drifted into the thin sleep that keeps one eye open. The sound of something tracing along the wall of my tent brought me up hard. It started at my foot, a gentle drag like one finger drawing a line the length of my ankle, then my calf. Through the thin fabric I could feel the exact path. A cold pressure, precise, unhurried. Every hair on my body stood. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. The finger, if it was a finger, paused at my knee as if considering the joint, then continued its line across my thigh. The pressure was never enough to dent the fabric. It was a mapmaker's touch or a child's. "Hey," I said, and my voice came out wrong, too soft, too polite. "Who's there?" No answer. The line stopped at my hip and lifted away from the fabric without a sound. The sudden absence of contact was its own kind of noise. Somewhere inches from my skin, something shifted weight on the gravel, and the tent wall trembled as a shallow breath bled through it. I pictured a face pressed close enough to fog the nylon. I reached slowly for the knife I keep by the door when I camp, my hand careful to not shake the blade against the pad. The tent wall moved again, just a faint bump, and then the sound went away in tiny, careful steps, the kind that don't want to be remembered. I lay still for a long time, counting to 60 and then starting over, my mouth dry, my heart pushing pulses into my fingertips. When my muscles finally loosened, the night had a gap in it, like a page torn from a book. I must have fallen into something like sleep, because the next thing I knew the moon was higher and the whistling came again, a thin line pulled tight between the trees and the water. 2 notes, pause. 2 more, longer now, shaping the same tune I had made by the fire. The notes drifted along the river, then came back, as if the water itself had learned to sing. I didn't answer. I pulled the sleeping bag zipper up to my chin and kept the knife in my hand until my grip hurt. A wind chased down the bend after midnight and pushed the tent wall against my cheek, cold through the fabric. I tried to let practical thoughts steady me. Maybe kids were out past the ridge messing around. Maybe someone else had camped upriver and we just couldn't see each other. But my chest said otherwise. My chest said there were eyes that had never blinked the way mine blink waiting just beyond that thin skin of nylon. When dawn finally thought better of it and started smearing light behind the trees, I was already lacing my boots. The fire pit had collapsed into a neat circle of gray and a few stubborn teeth of blackwood. The river looked ordinary again, rocks polished and patient. The world loves to look harmless in the morning. I didn't bother with oatmeal. I broke camp in a rush that felt like cheerfulness if you didn't look at it too closely. The tent came down in a stutter. My hands didn't want to cooperate, and the poles clacked together too loud. When I hefted my pack, I realized it weighed more than it had when I walked in. Water absorbs fear the way flour absorbs milk. Everything turns heavy. I took the long way back, avoiding the foundation shelf without deciding to. The woods felt aware. I kept my eyes down and then snapped them up at random, trying to catch something looking. Nothing moved, and yet I kept feeling the echo of that line along my leg, like a bruise your fingers keep finding. The truck waited where I'd left it, gray with a film of damp. My shoulders dropped when I saw it, a tiny surrender. I tossed my pack in the bed and reached for the handle. That's when I saw it. A piece of bark propped carefully against the driver's door, like a note left under a wiper. It was from a sycamore by the look of it, pale and smooth on the outside, stringy on the back. The smooth side had been carved with a pocket knife or a very sharp stone. The lines were neat and deep, each stroke deliberate. The carving was a stick figure, just a vertical line for a spine, two outstretched lines for arms, two for legs, but the head was wrong. It wasn't a round dot. It was a long oval split down the middle. The figure had a slash near the knee, a thin, straight cut, the exact place on my own leg where the touch had stopped to consider me. I didn't pick it up. I didn't want to touch it any more than you'd want to touch a spider's web when you know the builder is home. I used the edge of my sleeve to knock it away from the door so it fell flat on the mud. The carving looked even cleaner once it lay there. There was no rush in the lines. Whoever, or whatever, had made it wasn't clumsy or hurried. It had time. It had patience. I got in, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine coughed like it had been sleeping hard and then found itself. I put the truck in gear and tried not to look at the tree line as I pulled out. I failed at that and looked anyway. The woods were just woods, stitched into shaded layers. No face, no color out of place. Somewhere a woodpecker hammered its busy little prayer. Halfway to the county road, as the ruts grew shallower and the gravel became actual gravel, the whistling came one more time. Soft, not chasing me, exactly, just present. The same two notes, the same little climb and fall. It sounded like a child practicing in the corner of a room you had assumed was empty. I kept the truck rolling until the last bend delivered me to sunlight and pavement. I drove home without turning on the radio. The house felt wrong when I got there, like the furniture had been rearranged an inch in every direction. I took a shower so hot, I had to step out twice to breathe. In the mirror, I saw a faint red track along my right leg from ankle to knee, as if a thorn had drawn a line on skin not protected enough. It wasn't broken or scraped, just marked a small claim. I put my palm flat against it and held it there until my hand cooled. That night, my aunt called to talk about paperwork and thank you cards. Her voice shook at the edges. I wanted to tell her that I had gone to Jasper Bend for my uncle, and that something there had noticed me instead, that I'd brought back a tune I could not hum without hearing an answer. But I didn't. Some things don't translate, even when you try your best English on them. I lay awake later and felt the familiar weight of my apartment pressing down the way a calm cat presses the small of your back. I kept telling myself there were explanations. A prank, a hunter, a lost hiker with a pocket knife, and nothing better to do. Every time my mind offered one, it also offered the feeling of a fingertips path across a thin wall, patient as a teacher. I still have to drive near the bend for work sometimes. When I do, I make sure the windows are up and I don't whistle. I keep my eyes on the road. Even so, there are days when the wind through a stand of sycamores lines up just right and I hear those two notes. If I catch myself opening my mouth to answer, the old recess habit of filling silence with sound, I shut it and bite the inside of my cheek until I taste iron. In the glove box, there's a pocket knife with my uncle's initials scratched into the handle. It rides there like a bookmark in a story I haven't finished. Sometimes, at long red lights, I pull it out and flick the blade open and shut, a little hinge arguing with air. I don't carry it on the trail anymore. I don't camp by the river. I'm not brave, but I know this much. Somewhere beyond the gravel bar, up past the old foundation where the sapling rises out of whatever was hollowed out before it, something waits with a patient tune and hands that understand the shape of skin through thin cloth. If you go there and give it a melody, it will hand it back to you carved into the world. Neat lines, no hurry. And if you give it your leg, even for a second, it will remember where your bones are. My name is Chris, and a few years back I made the mistake of moving into my uncle's old place in Elkford. He left it to me when he passed, and at the time, I thought it was a blessing. Rent was killing me in town, and I figured I could fix the place up, maybe sell it down the line. It sat on the edge of Elkford, tucked back in the trees with a sagging porch and paint that had given up years before. I convinced myself it just needed some love, that maybe restoring it would give me something steady to do with my hands. When I first drove up, I remember thinking it looked more like a husk than a home. The roof line sagged like tired shoulders, and ivy had crept up one side of the chimney as if trying to strangle the house for good. But I told myself it was just work. For walls, a roof, some plumbing, it was manageable. Inside, though, the air had a weight to it. Not just dust or mildew, but something that made your chest feel heavy. I brushed it off, moved in a mattress and a few boxes, and told myself I'd grow used to it. That first week, I started noticing things. The first night, around 1 a.m, I woke to a scraping sound on the porch. Not the quick scratch of a raccoon or the heavy step of a deer, but something slow, dragging, like wood being pulled across wood. I sat up in bed and held still, the sheets sticking to my skin. The sound went on for a full minute, then stopped. I waited for a knock, but none came. The next night, there was a knock. Just 3 dull thuds against the front door. I was too scared to go look, so I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every muscle tight, until morning light came bleeding through the curtains. I told myself it was kids, maybe someone who knew the house had been empty and wanted to mess with me. But then the footsteps started. On the third night, I heard them upstairs. Clear as day, slow steps pacing from one end of the hall to the other. The thing was, there was nothing upstairs. The second floor was gutted years ago after a fire. No floorboards remained, just beams and empty space. I tried to picture animals, raccoons maybe, but raccoons don't pace like a man. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with a flashlight, my throat dry, my pulse shaking my vision. The steps stopped when I pointed the beam upward. Nothing but empty black space. But when I killed the light, the steps picked up again, unbothered, steady, like someone keeping watch. By the end of the first week, I wasn't sleeping much. One night, while lying in bed with my chest tight from holding my breath too long, I heard something different. Whispering, faint, as if pressed against the other side of my bedroom door. It wasn't words I could understand, more like a dry hiss, a murmur too low and broken to piece together. I stared at the door, my mind screaming at me to stay put, but something in me needed to know. Slowly, I pushed the blankets back, each creak of the mattress louder than the last. My feet touched the cold floor. I walked to the door, hand trembling as it hovered over the knob. The whispering grew sharper, faster, like it knew I was close. I turned the knob and pulled the door open. At first, the hallway looked empty, shadows draped across peeling wallpaper. Then I saw it. A figure stood pressed against the wall opposite my room. Tall, far taller than me, and thin enough that its bones looked like they might cut through. It was wrapped in long strips of cloth, not like bandages, but burial shrouds, layered and stained, clinging to it as though they'd been wet at some point and dried to its skin. Its head tilted as if listening, though I saw no eyes, no mouth, just the folds of cloth covering whatever was underneath. It began to move, but not in steps. It slid. Its whole body glided along the wall, the shrouds dragging against the plaster with that same scraping sound I'd heard the first night on the porch. I froze, unable to breathe. The figure moved slowly, its head still tilted in my direction, whispering faintly as it slid. My knees nearly buckled. I slammed the door shut and stumbled back until I hit the bed frame. The whispering stopped. I didn't sleep. I sat there until the first gray light crept through the window. When I finally opened the door again, the hall was empty. But the wall where the figure had pressed itself carried faint smears, long dark marks like something damp had dragged along it. I lasted one more night. That evening, the scraping returned on the porch, louder now, joined by the softest knocks against the siding. I barricaded the bedroom door with a chair and sat awake, clutching a hammer. The whispering came around 3 in the morning. Only this time, it wasn't outside the door. It was inside, circling the walls of my room, the voice trailing along like a thread unraveling in the dark. I snapped. I kicked the chair away, flung the door open, and ran barefoot down the stairs. The front door stuck for a second, as if something leaned against it, then gave way. Cold night air hit my face like water. I sprinted to my truck, fumbling the keys with shaking hands. I didn't look back until I was a mile down the road. Even then, I wished I hadn't, because through the rearview mirror, just for a second, I swore I saw something standing on that sagging porch. A figure, tall and thin, wrapped in white, watching me leave. I never went back. I left most of my things behind and signed the papers to put the property up for sale. Last I heard, no one has bought it. The real estate agent tells me it's still sitting there, waiting. But I know the truth. It isn't waiting for a buyer. It's waiting for someone foolish enough to open that bedroom door again. My name is Mark, and when my grandfather passed, it fell on me to clean up his property. He owned a good stretch of wooded land out past the ridge, where trails split off like veins and disappeared into the hills. Most folks around town knew the place as a maze of half-finished cabins, old hunting shacks, and trailers that had been hauled in and abandoned over the decades. I'd been there as a kid, riding on the back of his ATV, the air smelling like pine sap and gasoline. But going back alone as an adult was different. The land felt older, heavier, as though it hadn't been touched in years and didn't want to be. One morning, I decided to take the ATV down one of the forgotten trails. The path was narrow, roots punching up through the dirt, branches clawing at my shoulders as I drove. It was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels. Just the engine growling in my ears. About a mile in, I found the first trailer. It sat tilted on its axles, the windows busted out, the metal skin rusted and flaking. But what stopped me wasn't the trailer itself, it was what surrounded it. On the ground in front, laid out carefully, were bones. Not scattered, not chewed like an animal's leavings, but arranged. Small animal bones, lined up in geometric patterns, spirals and triangles, like some kind of ritual. I leaned closer, my stomach tightening. A raccoon skull sat in the center of one design, its teeth yellow and sharp. I told myself it was kids, maybe locals messing around. Still, I didn't stick around long. I kicked the ATV back to life and kept moving. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Another trailer sagged into the weeds a few bends later, its door hanging open. A line of vertebrae had been strung like beads across the doorway, tied together with what looked like fishing line. Tiny skulls dangled from the cord, each one marked with little cuts, like symbols scratched into bone. That's when I noticed the tracks. They weren't animal tracks. They were ATV treads, fresh enough that dirt still crumbled at the edges. Someone else had been riding back here recently, and they weren't just passing through. They were heading somewhere. I swallowed hard and followed the trail. The path curved down into a low clearing where the ground sloped toward a collapsed foundation, the last bones of what must have been a cabin decades ago. The stone walls sagged inward, half swallowed by moss. In the middle of the ruin was a doorway leading underground. It looked like a cellar. The roof caved in, but the entrance still yawning open. The ATV tracks stopped right at that door. I killed my engine and sat there for a moment, listening. The woods pressed in around me, silent and expectant. I slid off the seat and stepped closer. The doorway gaped like a mouth, shadows pooling so dark I couldn't see the back. The smell hit me first, damp earth, rot, and something wet and metallic. Then I heard it, a sound from inside, wet breathing, long, ragged pulls of air, as if lungs half full of water were dragging it in and forcing it out. I froze, my boots sinking into the soft ground. Something shifted just beyond the threshold. A burlap sack sat propped against the wall, twitching. At first, I thought maybe it was mice, but then the whole sack jerked and a muffled groan slipped out. Another bag beside it moved, rocking faintly. My stomach turned cold. I stepped back, ready to run, when a figure appeared in the doorway. He filled the frame, a man, tall, bearded, his face half hidden under the brim of a canvas hat. His clothes were worn but sturdy, work pants stained with mud, a heavy jacket hanging off his shoulders. His eyes caught mine, sharp even in the dim light. "You don't belong here," he said, voice low but steady. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He took a step forward, the shadow stretching off him like it wanted to reach me. "This place ain't for you. Not now. Not ever." I stammered something about my grandfather, about the property being ours, but he shook his head. "Doesn't matter whose name's on the paper. Some things don't care about papers." He glanced back into the cellar, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He turned back to me, his jaw tight. "If you know what's good for you, you'll turn around and ride out of here. Don't stop. Don't look back." The sacks moved again behind him, louder now, wet noises pushing out of them like something breathing through cloth. I thought I heard a faint whimper, or maybe a gurgle. My stomach knotted so hard I thought I might throw up. The man's voice cut through it sharp. "Run." I didn't argue. I stumbled back to the ATV, nearly tripping over myself in the rush. The engine screamed to life, and I gunned it, dirt flying behind me as I tore up the trail. I didn't slow, not once, until I broke through the tree line and saw my grandfather's house ahead. I parked the ATV and sat there, hands gripping the handlebars so tight my knuckles burned. My ears still rang with that wet breathing, that voice telling me to run. I didn't go back. I didn't tell anyone either. What could I say? That there was some man living under the ruins, guarding sacks that moved like they had lungs? Even now, years later, I think about him sometimes. The bearded man in the canvas hat. His eyes weren't cruel. They weren't mad either. They were the eyes of someone who knew he was standing too close to something no one should touch. And the worst part, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who'd taken it on himself to keep whatever was in that cellar from ever crawling out. I hope he's still there, because if he isn't, then whatever he was guarding might be loose by now. My name is David, and when my grandfather died, he left behind a cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't a place anyone had visited in years, not even him. The cabin was the kind of building that sagged with its own weight, hidden behind trees that had grown taller than when it was first built. My cousin Jake and I were asked to clean it out, maybe board it up, just to see what was worth saving. We drove out there one Saturday morning with the bed of Jake's truck loaded with cleaning supplies, trash bags, and tools. The road twisted so much we had to slow to a crawl, and by the time we reached the clearing, the cabin looked like something out of a storybook gone wrong. Its roof slanted under decades of rot, and the porch dipped low like it wanted to disappear into the dirt. Jake laughed when he saw it. "Hell, man, this place should be condemned." I didn't laugh. The place carried a silence that didn't feel natural. Even the birds avoided it. Inside, dust coated everything. Old coats hung limp on hooks by the door, untouched for years. We spent most of the morning bagging clothes, rolling up rugs, and dragging out junk furniture. The house groaned with every step, but it held. By noon, Jake found the cellar door. It was tucked behind the kitchen, a hatch in the floor with an iron ring for pulling it up. The wood around it was darker, as if water or something else had seeped through. Jake grinned. "Bet there's moonshine down there. You know, Grandpa." I hesitated. Or rats. Or snakes. But Jake had already yanked the hatch open. The smell hit us immediately, damp, sour, like old meat mixed with mold. A set of narrow stairs disappeared into shadow. Jake grabbed a flashlight from his pack and clicked it on. "Come on, let's see." I wanted to protest, but my pride got in the way. So we went down. The cellar was larger than I expected, the ceiling low, the stone walls wet with condensation. Wooden shelves lined one side, cluttered with glass jars. My stomach turned when the beam of Jake's light hit them. Inside each jar floated things, unidentifiable lumps, pale and shapeless, suspended in cloudy liquid. Some looked like organs. Others looked like deformed animals. One had what might have been a hand. "Jesus," Jake muttered. "What the hell was Grandpa doing down here?" I shook my head. I didn't want to know. In the center of the room stood a scarred wooden work table. Its surface was pitted with deep cuts, black stains sunk into the grain. Hooks dangled from the low rafters above it, swaying slightly even though no draft reached us. "All right," I said, swallowing hard. "We saw it. Let's go." Jake moved the light across the back wall, and that's when I saw it. A pile of burlap sacks stacked in the corner, as if someone had been storing potatoes or grain. Only, the way they bulged didn't look right. One of them moved. The shift was small, but I saw it clear as day. The sack rippled, like something inside was stretching against the fabric. Jake lowered the beam, frowning. "Did you?" The sack twitched again. Then another one. The burlap strained, pushing outward as though something inside was trying to unfurl. That's when it came out. From behind the pile, something pale slid into view. It didn't walk. It crawled, dragging itself across the stone floor. Its body was long, limbless at first glance, until I realized its arms were there, but bent in the wrong directions. Its joints popped as it moved, elbows folding backward, shoulders rotating like broken hinges. Its skin was almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that jutted sharp as sticks. I couldn't breathe. The thing's head, if you could call it that, tilted toward us. It had no eyes I could see, just hollows where features should have been. Its mouth sagged wide, and a wet hiss slipped out. Jake cursed and stumbled back, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. The thing crawled faster now, its body folding and unfolding in grotesque ways, pale limbs scrabbling over the stone like a spider that had forgotten how to be a spider. "Go!" I shouted. We bolted for the stairs, but the thing was faster than it had any right to be. I could hear it behind us, the slap of its limbs, the scrape of its body dragging against stone. Jake nearly dropped the flashlight as he scrambled up the steps, and for a moment, the beam swung back just enough for me to see the thing's head lifting toward me, its mouth opening wider, too wide, as if it meant to swallow the light itself. I shoved Jake through the hatch and pulled myself out just as something slammed against the underside of the floor. The whole cabin shook. I slammed the hatch shut, and Jake dropped the heaviest chair we had over it. The pounding stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. We didn't wait around. We grabbed our things and sprinted to the truck. My chest burned with every breath, and even as we peeled out of the clearing, I swore I could still hear that wet hiss echoing in my ears. When we reached the road, I finally glanced back at the tree line. That's when I saw it. A figure standing between the trees. Not the crawler. It was different. Taller. Motionless. Watching. Its shape was human, but it was too still, too sharp against the shadows. I blinked and it was gone. Jake saw it too. He didn't say anything, just pressed harder on the gas, his face pale and set. We never went back. The cabin is still there, rotting deeper into the woods, the cellar hatch probably swollen shut with damp. But I know what's under it. I know what crawled from behind those burlap sacks, twisting its limbs in ways no body should. And worse, I know something else was watching, waiting just beyond the treeline. Sometimes at night, when my house is quiet and the shadows gather in the corners, I hear that sound again. A wet hiss, a dragging crawl, and I wonder how long the cellar will keep it trapped. My name is Ryan, and a couple years ago, I decided to take a solo trip into the Blue Valley Range. I'd done plenty of camping before, but always with friends or family. This time, though, I wanted the silence. I wanted to see if I could spend a week in the woods alone, no voices but my own, no distractions but the fire and the stars. People warned me that Blue Valley was wild country, more isolated than most. That's what made it perfect to me. The first night was fine. I set up my tent near a boulder field where the valley dipped low and the trees opened enough to see the sky. The air smelled like pine and cold stone. I ate from a tin, listened to the night insects, and fell asleep with the steady pulse of crickets in my ears. The second night, things changed. I just started to drift when I heard a voice outside my tent. It was faint, almost casual. A man's voice, low, calling my name. Ryan. I sat up so fast I hit my head on the nylon. My heart thudded. Nobody knew exactly where I'd camped. I hadn't passed another hiker all day. The voice came again, closer this time, tugging at the fabric of the night. Ryan. I grabbed my knife and held my breath, straining to hear more. The footsteps I expected never came. The voice didn't speak again. After 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it. My name tangled up with the wind or with sleep. But I didn't really sleep after that. I lay stiff until the sun rose, every sound sharpened in my ears. The third night was worse. I had moved camp further up the valley, setting my tent beside a tall boulder for shelter. The day had been long, and by the time darkness dropped, I was too tired to do much but crawl inside. Sometime in the deep dark, a sound pulled me awake. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It came from just beyond the boulder, steady and deliberate. A slow inhale, a long exhale. Heavy, wet, as if the lungs behind it had to work harder than they should. I sat frozen, the knife trembling in my hand. The breathing never wavered, never broke. It wasn't an animal. Deer snort, bears huff, coyotes yip. This was human, but wrong. Too measured, too patient. I whispered, "Hello," before I could stop myself. The breathing paused. For a moment, the night went dead still. Then, after what felt like forever, it started again, closer this time, as though whatever it was had shifted behind the boulder, leaning nearer. I clenched my teeth and stayed silent. The sound went on for hours. Or maybe it was minutes, but it stretched, grinding in my nerves until I thought I might snap. When it finally faded, the silence felt worse. At dawn, I crawled out and checked the ground. The dirt was disturbed near the base of the boulder, pressed into shallow depressions. But they weren't normal footprints. There was only one, a single boot print. It was large, bigger than mine by several sizes. Pressed deep, with perfect tread detail, but there were no other tracks leading to it. No trail away, no trail toward it, just one print, stamped like a signature in the middle of the valley floor. I stood there staring until my skin went cold. That single mark looked deliberate, as though it had been placed for me to find. The rest of the week, I didn't stay in one place more than a few hours. I packed and moved constantly, never giving the valley a chance to catch up with me. But still, the sense of being followed gnawed at me. I never heard my name again, and I never heard that breathing up close, but at night, just as sleep threatened to take me, I swore I could feel lungs filling and emptying somewhere nearby, hidden by the trees. I cut the trip short on the 5th day. I told myself I was just tired, just spooked, but the truth is, I couldn't stand another night waiting for a voice or for breath at my door. When I got home, I unpacked my gear in the garage. My boots, still caked with valley mud, left prints across the concrete. That's when I noticed it. Mixed in with my tracks was another. Larger, heavier. A single boot print stamped right there beside my pack. Just one. I never went back to Blue Valley Range. And sometimes, when I lie awake in my own bed, the window cracked to let the air in, I swear I can hear it again. The long, steady inhale, the patient exhale. like something that followed me out of the valley and never left. My name is Tom, and a couple summers back I got hired by the state as a conservation worker. Most of the job was simple, surveying old forest tracks, checking for invasive species, and logging whatever wildlife signs I found. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the quiet. The woods didn't ask anything from you except that you respected them. One assignment stuck with me more than any other. I was told to survey Track 14, a section of forest that hadn't been touched since 1978. The file they gave me was thin, just a hand-drawn map, some vague notes about old settlement ruins, and a warning about unstable terrain. No one on the team had worked it before, and when I asked my supervisor why it had been skipped for so long, she just shrugged and said, "It's about time we checked it." I started in the morning, hiking in under a sky that looked like it had been scrubbed clean. The trail was overgrown but still traceable, the kind of path that feels like it remembers feet even if it hasn't seen any in decades. After about an hour, I found the first ruin. It was nothing more than a foundation of stacked stones, moss spreading thick over the edges. The air carried that deep forest smell, wet leaves, old bark, earth that never sees sun. As I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. Scattered in the dirt were children's belongings. A rusted lunchbox lay half-buried under leaves, its faded paint showing a cartoon astronaut. Inside, when I pried it open, were marbles, bright glass swirls that somehow hadn't dulled in all those years. Nearby, I found a cracked toy truck, its wheels still intact. The sight of them made my stomach turn, not because of what they were, but because of how they'd been left. Careless, like someone had dropped everything mid-game and never returned. I kept moving, though my steps felt heavier now. The forest pressed in thicker, and after another mile, I began to hear movement. Not loud, not crashing, but steady, like footsteps mirroring mine. Every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. I scanned the trees, my heart kicking harder each time the underbrush swayed. I told myself it was deer, maybe a black bear, but it never broke into a run, never veered off, just trailed me. Then I found the boot prints, fresh ones, pressed in a soft mud along the path. They weren't mine, too large, too deep. I crouched down, tracing one with my finger, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. These prints hadn't been here long, hours, maybe less, but Track 14 was supposed to be empty. I followed them for a few yards before I realized they weren't leading anywhere. The print stopped suddenly in the middle of the trail, no turn, no retreat, just gone. I stood there too long, the forest dead quiet, until a voice broke through the silence. It came from my left, faint at first. A man's voice, hoarse and dragging. "Come back." The words froze me in place. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Then it came again, louder, as if the speaker had stepped closer without disturbing a single branch. "Come back." My skin prickled all over. My instincts screamed to move, to run, but my legs felt nailed into the dirt. The voice repeated again and again, each time sounding nearer. "Come back. Come back." The tone never changed, flat and steady, like a recording on loop. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root, and that's when I saw it. At the edge of the trees stood a figure. It was tall, taller than any man I'd seen, and draped in a canvas coat stained dark with mud and something else I didn't want to identify. Its head was lowered, but I felt its attention lock onto me. One of its arms rose slowly, deliberate as a clock hand, and it pointed deeper into the woods, toward Track 14. My breath hitched. "I'm just surveying," I whispered, though I don't know why I spoke at all. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just held that long, shaking finger aimed at the path ahead, as if commanding me back. I didn't obey. I turned and bolted the way I'd come, branches whipping my face, my lungs screaming for air. Behind me, the voice followed, still flat, still relentless. Come back. Come back. I didn't stop until I broke into daylight near the ranger station. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the gravel lot, gasping. When my supervisor asked why I'd cut the survey short, I lied. I told her the terrain was unstable, just like the file warned. She nodded, didn't press. Track 14 went back into the cabinet, untouched again. But I know what's waiting there. The lunchbox and the marbles. The prints that end where they shouldn't. The voice that won't stop calling you back. And that figure in the canvas coat, still pointing into the woods, still waiting for someone to follow. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it again, faint but insistent. Come back. And the worst part is, part of me wants to. My name is Eric, and when my uncle grew sick, he passed down to me a hunting cabin he'd built years ago. He said it wasn't much, just a roof in the woods where he used to go to get away. I figured it'd be nothing more than a dusty shack with a leaky stovepipe. A headache, maybe, but still, owning land out in the hills had its charm. I drove out one Saturday in late fall, leaves crisp under my tires, air already sharp with winter. The road grew narrower until it was little more than a path. The cabin sat in a hollow where the trees pressed close, their branches bare and black against the pale sky. It looked rough but solid, boards weathered silver, chimney still standing. At first, I thought I'd lucked out, but then I noticed the wire. It stretched between the trees at the edge of the clearing, thin and taut, like someone had strung a clothesline through the forest. From it hung bones. Small, bleach bones tied on with twine. Some dangled loose, rattling faintly in the breeze, others fixed tight against the line. Each had markings scratched into the surface, symbols I didn't recognize. Circles with lines through them, jagged crosses, crude spirals. I stood there staring, the hair on my arms prickling. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't some hunter's trick. It felt like a warning. I should have turned back, but stubbornness got the better of me. I told myself it was just some old superstition of my uncle's, maybe meant to keep trespassers out. I ducked under the wire and went inside. The cabin was musty, filled with shadows even in daylight. A cot leaned against one wall, a stove sat rusted in the corner. Everything felt left in a hurry, like he'd packed up without finishing. I tried to settle in, telling myself I'd just spend the night, make sure the place was safe, and go home in the morning. As the sun dropped, the woods grew silent. Not just quiet, silent. No owls, no crickets, no wind moving the branches. The air pressed heavy, like the whole hollow was holding its breath. I built a small fire in the stove and sat by it, but the shadows seemed to twitch just beyond the circle of light. Then came the pounding. It started slow, thuds circling the cabin, one after another, as if something was walking laps around me. Each thud shook the walls, dust sifting down from the rafters. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, my heart banging in my chest, but I didn't dare step outside. The pounding continued, steady, deliberate, like fists or maybe feet slamming the earth. It went on for what felt like hours, always circling, never stopping. The moment I thought it had ended, another strike rattled the wall. I didn't sleep. I sat upright on the cot, staring at the door, waiting for it to splinter inward. By the time the gray light of dawn seeped through the cracks, the pounding had finally gone quiet. I stumbled outside, my legs weak. The forest was still, the clearing calm, as though nothing had happened. Then my stomach dropped. The wire was empty. Every bone that had hung from it, every bleached piece, every symbol-marked fragment, was gone. The twine dangled loose in places, cut clean. The wire stretched bare between the trees, humming faintly in the morning breeze. I turned in a slow circle, and that's when I saw them. Figures, tall, silent, standing between the trees. They weren't close, not yet, but they filled the woods, lean shapes rising out of the shadows, still as statues. I couldn't see faces, just outlines, as though the forest had grown bodies of its own. They stood in rows, watching. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I grabbed my bag, sprinted to my truck, and tore down the trail so fast I nearly snapped an axle. My hands shook the whole drive home. I never went back to the cabin. When people ask why, I tell them it's too far gone to fix. I never mention the bones, or the pounding, or the watchers in the trees. But I know what I saw. The bones weren't decorations. They were seals, boundaries, markers keeping something out, or maybe keeping something in. And the moment they were gone, the figures stepped forward, silent and waiting, as though the forest had been theirs all along and I had just broken the line. My name is Claire, and I hadn't set foot on my great-aunt Lydia's farm in over 20 years. When I was a kid, I spent one summer there, just long enough to know I hated it. The house sat at the end of a rutted road in rural West Virginia, surrounded by woods so dense they seemed to lean closer every night. Even back then, the place felt wrong. Too quiet, too heavy. When the letter came that Lydia had passed and left me the property, I almost ignored it. I had no good memories of that house, but something pulled me back. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to see if the place was as bad as I remembered. I drove out on a gray afternoon. The clouds pressed low, the trees forming dark walls on either side of the road. When I reached the clearing, the house looked exactly as it had in my childhood. Sagging porch, crooked chimney, windows dull with grime. It seemed smaller now, but the woods behind it loomed taller, crowding close like they were trying to swallow it. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint smell of rot. Sheets covered the furniture, brittle with age. I walked from room to room, each step creaking across warped floorboards. The kitchen stopped me cold. There, in the middle of the linoleum floor, sat a door. A square of wood with an iron ring. A cellar hatch. I remembered it from when I was a girl. Remembered Lydia slamming it shut when I'd wandered too close. Only now, the hatch was nailed down. Dozens of rusted nails studded the edges, some hammered so deep they'd splintered the wood. Others bent sideways, their heads flattened against the boards. Someone had wanted this door shut permanently. I crouched, running my fingers along the edge. The nails weren't new. They'd been there a long time, but the sight of them made my skin crawl. That night, as I lay in the upstairs bedroom listening to the groan of the house, I tried to forget about the door. But sleep wouldn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those bent nails, that hatch sealed like a wound. On the second night, I understood why. It started as scratching. Faint at first, like a mouse chewing in the walls. But it didn't scatter or pause. It kept going, deliberate and steady. The sound wasn't random. It traced. I lay rigid in bed, listening, and realized it was moving in patterns, tracing the outline of the cellar door from below. I sat up, my mouth dry, and crept to the kitchen. The sound was louder there, rising through the boards. Slow, methodical strokes, like fingernails dragging against wood. Something was mapping the hatch from the other side. I fled to the barn the next morning, trying to shake it off as my nerves. That's when I found the crowbar. It leaned in a corner, red with rust. Against every instinct, I carried it back inside. I don't know what I meant to prove. Maybe just that it was empty, that there was nothing to fear. On trembling knees, I pried up one corner of the hatch. The nails shrieked, the wood groaned, but I managed to open a gap just wide enough to shine a flashlight down. The beam cut through damp air. The cellar was a dirt chamber, walls lined with shelves of mason jars. Most were empty, the glass coated with film. A few still held vegetables, collapsed into black mush. The smell of rot wafted up, thick enough to gag me. Then the light caught on something at the far end. A small wooden chair. It faced the ladder, as though waiting for someone to climb down. And on that chair sat a child's dress. Faded blue, patterned with tiny flowers. Arranged neatly, draped as if someone were still wearing it. I slammed the hatch shut so hard dust puffed up from the seams. My stomach heaved, but nothing came out. That night, the scratching turned to pounding. The blows shook the kitchen floor, rattling the dishes in the cupboards. The nails screamed as they loosened, pinging one by one across the linoleum. I pressed myself into the corner, hands over my ears as the sound grew worse. Through the widening gap came a voice. Thin, ancient. It spoke in the dialect my great-aunt used, that slow mountain drawl I hadn't heard in decades. At first, it hummed, low and lilting like a lullaby. Then the words formed. Nursery rhymes, but wrong. The cadence was familiar, but the words were twisted, bent into something that made my teeth ache. Hush now, little one. The worms will have their bite. Hush now, little one. We'll play beneath the night. I sobbed into my hands, rocking, until the voice faded just before dawn. By the third night, only a few nails still held the hatch. Splinters rimmed the edges. The thing below whispered constantly now, coaxing, pleading. Come down and play the old games. You remember them, don't you? Why'd you leave us down here in the dark so long? I shoved the kitchen table over the hatch, piling chairs on top. My arms shook with the effort, my breath ragged. Still, the voice seeped through the cracks, tugging at the edges of my mind. I didn't sleep. Every slam against the floor made the table jump. Every word felt closer, heavier. By morning, silence. I crept downstairs, my body hollow. The kitchen table lay overturned, chairs scattered. The hatch gaped open. A trail of muddy footprints, small, child-sized, led out of the cellar and across the floor. They smeared up the stairs, one by one, until they stopped at my bedroom door. My breath hitched. I stepped inside, afraid to look, but I couldn't stop myself. On the mirror above the dresser, written in condensation as though by invisible hands, were the words, "We've been waiting."